Yo guys, Visionist Gen here, bringing you Marvel Rivals Best Competitive Team Part 14, where I'll be breaking down the best lineups to be using right now in competitive, following the latest Season 2.5 update. This is Part 3 of the new season update episodes, where I've got the previous episodes on the channel for episodes 12 and 13, and of course this one, which is the Part 3. Now this lineup will consist of the best characters in the game right now, which will work alongside one another due to the strengths and weaknesses, and of course the team dynamic. I'll explain how to use each of the 6 heroes in this video based on their roles, whilst also identifying what adjustments you'll want to consider when you'd make them and why. So on that note, let's get right into it. So as usual, I'll explain how to use each of the 6 heroes in this video based on their roles, whilst also identifying what adjustments you'll want to make, when and why, as I said. But as for the roster itself, I won't be going over a guide as such on all of their individual abilities, as I've made guides separately on the channel for the most part on all of the characters in the game, and I am assuming for the most part that anyone that watching this video and learning about the best comp teams following the latest Season 2.5 update is already fully aware of all or most of the heroes and their abilities. Now in this video and going forward, I'm going to try and implement some different and more unique lineups for future episodes, but for the most part this is a very comp and viable lineup to be using. Arguably probably the best individual team lineup of all the episodes I made so far in this new season in terms of individual characters and meta characters and so on, and strengths and weaknesses. But this is arguably the sort of, like I said, top 3 best teams in the entire game, and we'll go over the sort of individual characters, so on and now. But of course not all of these lineups and characters will work in competitive for you guys. Depending on your rank as well as your skill level, you should probably try out some of these team comps and heroes in a more casual environment first, in case you guys aren't familiar with them. But for this episode, it's in place for you to be aware of all of the potential lineups that you could consider and different team compositions and so on. So as for this lineup, we'll get into it now. As usual, we'll be starting with the tanks, and for this setup we will be using a 2-tank setup, which will consist of Emma Frost and Magneto, Psylocke and Punisher, and Cloak and Dagger and Mantis. And as I said, is a 2-2-2 setup which consists of 2 Vanguards, 2 Duelists and 2 Strategists. And then just to remind you guys, as the general rule for these episodes and this series, is that I try not to use any duplicate heroes from previous episodes. So for episodes 1 and 2, I will not be using in the initial starting lineup any of those episodes or those heroes for this episode, and that is the general theme of this. So I'm trying to use different heroes so that you guys are aware that they are all still viable. They just work in different ways and different metas based on the buffs and nerfs and so on. Now, as for Magneto, he will be responsible as the starting hero for damage mitigation, range damage, and alleviating that dive pressure using his mag cannon, as well as saving his ultimate for key moments, being a crucial factor to understand here to counter other defensive ultimates such as the Cloak and Dagger or Invisible Woman ultimates and so on. Now, as for Emma Frost, when paired alongside Magneto, she provides a really well balanced and effective dynamic who complements his playstyle really well, using her shield to further block damage and also her diamond form to sustain and brawl alongside other heroes, and her telepathic abilities to manipulate and remove enemies with ease. Now with the new damage range buff, she's slightly more effective offensively now in her primary form, but not to mention obviously that she did take a slight nerf on the defensive side of things. But with the mental projection team ability with both Magneto and Psylocke, this is really effective and currently really dominant in this meta, and therefore Psylocke will be the 3rd hero for this team comp, being solely responsible for breaking down the enemy team's setup, relying on her ninja playstyle and stealth abilities to apply some of the game's highest burst DPS that we have seen, and peel back to support those strategists, of course, from dive threats, whilst also being effective from both range to mitigate those aerials from being effective and so on. And then when combined with the Punisher as for the 4th hero, these will be really effective and thrive in this current aerial meta at mitigating those flyers from being effective. And also, if you wanted to take more of a grounded approach, this is a good comp, and what I would suggest by using both Psylocke and Punisher together behind those 2 Vanguard setups. And then as for the 1st support and the 5th hero, we will be using the underrated strategist that doesn't get enough love, is Cloak and Dagger, a very effective healer in group situations, which with the Punisher, Mag and Emma always being basically forward facing and quite tight knit, this will be really effective, and she'll be able to provide constant heals for them and use the vulnerability effect, of course, to frontline enemies that basically get too aggressive or dive threats, and then basically make it easier for your team to remove them and get rid of them and have that numbers advantage. And then when combined with Mantis, who typically in previous seasons has been better in more of a 3 support setup, however in this setup as the 6th hero, who's arguably one of the best counter dive heroes in the entire game, really effective at stunning the likes and sleeping the likes of Venom from escaping when he is isolated, making it really critical for this team when facing dive heroes, but also providing your teammates with healing over time and damage buffing capabilities, which will further increase the Punisher's damage output massively, whilst also being a sneaky assassin herself. A really effective hero and will definitely work in this team comp. Although if you want, obviously we'll go through in the adjustments, if you want better healing, there is certain different options. But as I said, with the trend of this sort of theme of this series, trying to use different healers and different heroes, this is why we're going to use Mantis. But for the most part, if on paper, if we were going to use a different healer, I would probably go with maybe Luna Snow right now, or even Loki, as they are arguably the best two. But seeing as we've used them in the previous 2 episodes, we are going to use Mantis. Now, with a structured team, it's important that you will understand your team lineup and the strengths and weaknesses of that lineup, but also your own heroes counters and your team ups and all of those factors which make and form the current meta, which is of course what I'm explaining right now. And then also another underrated element that people just don't seem to excel at is communication. People don't tend to just flag up when they need healing enough, or maybe when their ultimate is ready and they're trying to coordinate it with different teammates. This is a skill gap issue that most players don't really understand, and once you get better at the game, you will start seeing that these factors, these little elements of the game, are really going to allow you to excel and win you team fights more often than not. And another factor is called, what I like to refer to as a term called reading between the lines, which is basically when you see a squad like this, and let's say you're going to play Emma Frost, you saw that your teammate wanted to play Magneto, and you saw your other teammate wanted to play Psylocke, therefore you go Emma Frost to formulate that team up and that mental projection team up, which is really effective, of course, and a meta-defining team ability in this game. Those sort of factors and those elements of understanding are called reading between the line, and at higher ranks in competitive, you will just notice that teammates that are in the sort of higher diamonds and sort of up to Grandmaster and Celestial will start to learn these things and know them really well straight away once they see a team comp, and this is the sort of initiative that you will have to develop in order to get better and win you games, but also in certain team structures it's more important than others. And then with regards to the bans, who you want to ban and why, with regards to your counters, your team strengths and your weaknesses, personally I think Punisher's shotgun and Cloak and Dagger's vulnerability and Mantis's sleep abilities and damage buffing and all that sort of stuff, all of those things will basically negate the likes of Hulk and Venom from being effective, so they're not necessarily an issue. So I wouldn't personally ban them, but obviously they are someone that I would consider if you are not comfortable at any of these heroes, of course, and of course if they are not in this team comp, but you know for the most part they're going to be a problem for your team. But I would definitely consider banning the likes of Hela and Hawkeye with their insanely high burst DPS abilities, who can snipe out your supports, and seeing as you're not even going to be using them in your team, and considering the latest buffs have making them so good and currently arguably the best sort of duelists in the game right now, I would definitely consider banning either of them. And then also I consider banning maybe even Luna or Loki, two very strong supports in this game, arguably the best, and without having them, taking them away from the other team and not allowing them to have them on their team isn't exactly a bad play necessarily. In case you guys don't like those heroes and can't use them, or in case your supports just won't change them, it's not a bad idea in future experiences to just take them out of the game. And then you don't need to ban any of the dive threats, as I've explained before, based on the heroes that you have, especially like the Wolverine, considering you have Emma Frost and a good balance across the team for the most part. And seeing as you have Punisher, Groot's effectiveness is massively negated due to the amount of damage that he can provide, which tears through shields and walls. But if your Punisher has a lot going on and there's just so much to be doing and he's a bit overwhelmed, Groot can really prevent your team from moving around and sort of reposition your team quite badly to delay the pace, and can end up basically isolating your players. So it could be worth considering banning Groot, but for the most part, if your Punisher knows what he's doing and he is well supported, he can really just destroy those walls, and they're really not a problem at all. So I wouldn't necessarily have to ban or waste a ban on Groot, even though he's probably one of the most banned characters in the entire game, which is just a shame because I love playing Groot. It's something I'm trying to learn at the minute as a Vanguard main myself. But anyways, with regards to the adjustments to each of these heroes, when you'd make them and why, here is the following. So as for Magneto, if due to the lack of mobility for this character, and like I said, if they do have a Wolverine and Emma just isn't cutting it, or the person you have playing Emma just isn't really supporting the Magneto, and Wolverine is a problem, or just Magneto's damage blocking isn't needed, then I would definitely consider changing Magneto to a more mobile tank, to maybe even Venom, or even Captain America or the Thing, someone that can allow either backline pressure or point pressure using the likes of the Thing with his crowd control abilities and AoE can be really effective if that is the problem that you guys have. Or you could just consider changing to even Strange with better mobility and also a primary sort of shield blocking and damage mitigating tank to sort of solve this problem for your team. Now, as for Emma Frost, if you're going to change Emma Frost for certain reasons, whether she's banned or whether you just don't have anyone that's good at the character or so on, then I would consider changing Emma. And if the other team has a group setup or is using a ton of traps with Penny, etc., then change to an aerial setup where you can use either Storm, Iron Man, or the Human Torch. Go to a one tank setup. That way you're not relying on point pressure, and you can therefore utilize the aerial meta and go in the skies and utilize these really overpowered heroes in the game right now, such as Storm, Iron Man, and Human Torch. Now, as for Psylocke, if the sort of diving hybrid playstyle just isn't working, she's being isolated, or that again, if they have Penny and there's too many traps and therefore she's less effective, then I would also consider changing to another aerial that can go in the air and join this dual aerial setup. So if you have a Storm and an Iron Man, then you could really sort of run the skies and control everything from above, or even Human Torch, and utilize the cool tornado team ability with the likes of Storm and Human Torch. Or, of course, you can utilize the fact that you might add in Ultron down below in the further adjustments, and therefore utilize the new team ability with Iron Man and Ultron. And then as for Punisher, if he's being sniped by a Hela or a Hawkeye or Dovon, or has too many shields that are blocking his incoming damage via maybe Strange, Mag, or Groot, then consider changing to Winter Soldier for better sustain and brawling and maintaining that ranged aspect. Or consider changing to Ultron for a 3 support meta, and especially if you add in Iron Man for the team comp above with the adjustments for the likes of Psylocke and so on. And now as for Cloak and Dagger, if she's being targeted by Magneto ultimate, and her ultimate is just not effective for defensive purposes, and your Punisher changes, then consider changing to either Loki or Luna, as I mentioned before, for better overall healing, considering they are basically the best 2 strategists in the game right now, and especially if you have Ultron and using a 3 support setup, and Luna's secondary heal is really effective for sort of aerial players as well, so she doesn't need to focus on them and can primarily focus on your single tank if that is the case. And then as for Mantis, finally, if she's just not effective because the other team has no dives and are using aerial players, then consider changing to either Jeff for the Storm team ability if you add Storm into the lineup, of course, and provides really good healing following the latest update, or add in the likes of Rocket for better mobility and that respawn beacon to add in a bit of that clutch factor. Now, as for the team ups of all of the named heroes in this list, here is a quick summary of all of the potential link ups to consider when you're forming your team, because I appreciate I did just go over a lot of heroes. So the first one is the Emma, Mag, and Psylocke. The second one is the Storm and Jeff. The third one is the Storm and Human Torch, and the fourth one is Iron Man and Ultron. So in summary, this lineup and team structure has initially a good balance with damage buffing capabilities with the vulnerability and the Mantis abilities, of course, as well as good tanking setup with the 2-2-2 setup from the get-go. Now, it is key to understand that you need to change when and why, which will be, as I mentioned in this video, with the adjustments that I've mentioned, you should be able to flexibly alter each of the heroes where required, depending on whether your team is finding success off the break, or whether or not the other team is making adjustments throughout the game to counter your lineup. So just consider this throughout. But anyways, guys, that's pretty much it for the most part. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know down below if you have any alterations or comments that you'd make to this lineup and why. If you have any cool clips or tips that you've learned along the way about being a part of in this sort of setup, then let me know down below, as I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I'm Vision SGN. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.